I'm Adriana, 27 years old, lying in this sterile hospital room with both legs shattered and three broken ribs. The machines beep steadily monitoring my survival after the crash. My mother's words still echo, "Live or die, I don't care." No family visited for weeks. They abandoned me completely. But their cruelty became my unexpected strength. If you're watching from a hospital bed too or anywhere, life has left you feeling abandoned, drop a comment below and subscribe to join me on this journey of transformation. Growing up in our middle-class suburban home in Michigan, I always felt like I was fighting for air in a house that somehow had plenty of space but no room for my existence. Our two-story colonial with its perfect lawn and coordinated furniture was just like my mother, Catherine. Pristine on the outside, cold and empty within. My mother worked as a real estate agent, completely obsessed with status and appearances. She was the type who would spend hours selecting the perfect outfit for a neighborhood barbecue, but couldn't spare 5 minutes to ask about my day. Her validation came from sales numbers and the envy of other women, not from genuine human connection, especially not with her middle child. My father, Thomas, was an accountant who traveled constantly for work. When he was home, he was physically present but emotionally absent, hiding behind newspapers or locked in his home office doing extra work. He was the ultimate passive enabler, watching my mother's emotional neglect without intervention, choosing peace over parenting. Then there was my older sister Jillian, 3 years my senior, and the undisputed golden child of the family. She mirrored my mother in almost every way, academically gifted, socially calculated, and ambitious to a fault. By the time I entered high school, she was already at an Ivy League school making connections and planning her perfect future as a corporate lawyer. Every conversation at our dinner table somehow circled back to Jillian's latest accomplishment. My younger brother Ethan was the family's designated problem child. 2 years younger than me, he rebelled against our parents' emotional absence in ways I never dared, skipping school, experimenting with drugs, and eventually developing a substance abuse problem that everyone acknowledged but no one properly addressed. His troubles at least got him attention, even if it was negative. And then there was me, Adriana, the invisible middle child. I was the family peacemaker, the emotional support human who tried desperately to hold everything together. I was the one who covered for Ethan when he snuck out, who listened to my mother's complaints about her competitors, who nodded supportively during my father's rare moments of career frustration. I was everyone's emotional dumping ground and no one's priority. From my earliest memories, I tried everything to gain my parents' approval. I maintained perfect grades, joined every club I thought might impress them, kept my room immaculate, and never caused trouble. I became the daughter who would set the table without being asked, and remember everyone's preferences and schedules. I was the family secretary, therapist, and cheerleader all in one, yet somehow never important enough to be seen. When I received a full scholarship to Northwestern University, I saw it as both my escape route and my chance to finally make my parents proud. The night I got my acceptance letter, I planned a special dinner announcement, spending hours cooking my father's favorite lasagna. When I shared the news, my mother's first question wasn't about my achievement, but whether Northwestern was better or worse ranked than Jillian's school. My father nodded approvingly, but immediately turned the conversation to whether the scholarship would cover all expenses or if they needed to budget for additional costs. College became my first taste of freedom. Chicago was only a few hours from our Michigan home, but it felt like a different world. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who actually listened when I spoke, who valued my opinions and interests. I made real friends who chose to spend time with me not out of obligation, but genuine connection. I discovered my passion for marketing and creative strategy, areas where my empathy and perception, the very traits that had made me a good family peacemaker, became professional strengths. 4 years passed in what felt like moments. While many of my classmates worried about finding jobs after graduation, I was recruited by a prestigious marketing firm right in Chicago. I secured an apartment with a college friend in a vibrant neighborhood, built a network of supportive friends, and started therapy to begin addressing my family issues. For the first time, I was building a life based on what I wanted and what would please my parents. 3 years into my career, I received an unexpected promotion to senior strategist, jumping ahead of colleagues with more experience. The accomplishment felt monumental, proof that I was valued, that my work mattered. Despite years of disappointment, some childish part of me still craved my family's validation. I called my mother to share the news, and surprisingly, she suggested I come home that weekend for a family dinner to celebrate. Hope bloomed in my chest as I packed an overnight bag that Friday. Maybe this was the turning point, the moment when they would finally see me. I even splurged on an expensive bottle of champagne for the occasion. The weather forecast mentioned rain, but nothing could dampen my spirits as I set out on the 4-hour drive from Chicago to our suburban Michigan home. I remember singing along to my favorite playlist as dark clouds gathered on the horizon. The rain started light, but intensified quickly as I approached the state line. By the time I was an hour from home, it was coming down in sheets. I called my mother to let her know I might be a bit late due to the weather. Her response was typical, a reminder not to be late since she'd already made dinner reservations at some new upscale restaurant she wanted to try. I slowed my speed as visibility worsened, but I was still determined to make it on time. I was only 30 minutes from home when it happened. A truck in the next lane hydroplaned, suddenly swerving into my path. I jerked the steering wheel instinctively, trying to avoid impact. My car skidded, tires losing their grip on the waterlogged asphalt. The world spun around me as my vehicle left the road, rolling down the shallow embankment beside the highway. The last thought I had before everything went black was that I would miss dinner and my mother would be disappointed in me yet again. I remember fragments of the accident like disconnected movie scenes, the weightless feeling as the car rolled, the deafening crush of metal, the explosion of glass, and then the strange silence after everything stopped moving. The pain hadn't registered yet when I first opened my eyes, just confusion and the upside-down perspective from my car that had landed on its roof. Rain was still pouring in through the shattered windows when I heard someone shouting. A man's face appeared contorted with concern. "Don't move," he said firmly. "Help is coming." This stranger, whose name I would later learn was Patrick, had been driving behind me and witnessed the entire accident. He had immediately pulled over and called 911 while rushing down the embankment to reach me. As the shock began to wear off, pain surged through my body like electricity. My legs were trapped under the crushed dashboard, and each shallow breath sent sharp agony through my chest. Patrick stayed with me, holding my hand through the window and talking to keep me conscious until the wail of sirens announced the arrival of emergency services. The extraction was a blur of pain and shouted instructions as firefighters worked to cut me free from the wreckage. I screamed when they finally pulled me out, the movement sending white-hot pain through my lower body. The paramedics worked quickly, stabilizing my neck, starting an IV, and assessing my injuries before loading me into the ambulance. One of them, a woman with kind eyes above her mask, held my hand during the journey to the trauma center. "We're taking you to Mercy Hospital," she explained. "It's the best trauma center in the region. You're going to be okay, but you've got some serious injuries." In the emergency room, I was immediately surrounded by a team of doctors and nurses. Their voices were calm but urgent as they cut away my clothes and attached monitors to my body. A doctor with silver-streaked hair leaned over me, his expression serious. "Adriana, I'm Dr. Patel. You've suffered multiple fractures to both legs, several broken ribs, and we're concerned about internal bleeding. We need to get you into surgery right away." I tried to speak through the oxygen mask to ask about calling my family, but consciousness was already slipping away as they administered anesthesia. When I woke hours later in the recovery room, the pain was dulled by medication, but the gravity of my situation was becoming clear. A nurse explained that I had undergone emergency surgery to address internal bleeding from a lacerated liver, and that both of my legs required extensive reconstruction with metal rods and screws. One of my broken ribs had punctured a lung, necessitating a chest tube. "Your phone survived the crash," the nurse said, holding up my slightly cracked but functioning smartphone. "Would you like me to call someone for you?" I nodded weakly and gave her my mother's number. She put the call on speakerphone since I couldn't hold the device myself. The phone rang 3 times before my mother answered with an impatient, "Hello." The nurse introduced herself professionally. "Mrs. Lawson, I'm calling from Mercy Hospital. Your daughter Adriana has been in a serious car accident and is in recovery after emergency surgery. She has multiple fractures and internal injuries, but she's stable now." There was a pause before my mother responded, her voice cold and annoyed. "Well, she was supposed to be here for dinner 2 hours ago. We've been waiting at the restaurant." The nurse looked startled but continued. "She's going to need significant support during recovery. The doctors expect she'll be hospitalized for at least 2 weeks, possibly longer." 2 weeks? That's ridiculous. "Tell her to stop being dramatic," my mother snapped. Then her voice became slightly distant, as if she was speaking to someone else in the room. "Thomas, Adriana got herself into some kind of accident and is going to miss dinner." I could hear my father's muffled question in the background, and then my mother's voice returned to the line, sharp and dismissive. "Live or die, I don't care. We have dinner reservations. She always does this, making everything about her." The nurse's eyes widened in shock. She quickly moved to end the call, but not before I heard my mother complaining about having to cancel their evening plans. The nurse turned to me with an expression of disbelief and pity that I'll never forget. "I'm so sorry," she said, squeezing my hand gently. I'm just so sorry." I closed my eyes, tears sliding down my temples into my hair. The physical pain was excruciating, but it was nothing compared to the confirmation of what I had always suspected, but tried to deny my own mother didn't care if I lived or died. The days that followed were a haze of pain medication, medical procedures, and growing isolation. Each morning I would wake up hoping to see a family member in the chair beside my bed, and each morning I faced another day of disappointment. The nurses began exchanging concerned glances when no visitors arrived. They checked the contact information they had on file, confirming they had the correct numbers for my family. On the 3rd day, I asked the nurse, a compassionate woman named Maya, who had taken a special interest in my case, to help me call my sister Jillian. "Of course your mother told us what happened," Jillian said after I explained my situation. "It's just a really busy time at the firm. I've got this massive case I'm preparing for trial. You understand, right? I'll try to come by next week when things settle down." Next, I tried my brother Ethan, who at least sounded genuinely concerned. "That's messed up, Audrey. I'm so sorry. I'm actually not in a great place right now, but I promise I'll come see you tomorrow, okay?" Tomorrow came and went. So did the next day, and the one after that. No Ethan, no Jillian, certainly no parents. A week into my hospital stay, I underwent another surgery to further repair my shattered legs. When I woke up in recovery, groggy and in pain, Maya was there adjusting my IV. "Still no family?" she asked gently. I shook my head, too tired and heartbroken to speak. "I don't understand," she admitted. "I've been a nurse for 15 years, and I've never seen a patient with such serious injuries left completely alone by their family." "I've never been a priority," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. As the days passed, I began developing relationships with the hospital staff, who became my de facto support system. Maya would come by during her breaks to chat, often bringing me little treats from the cafeteria. A physical therapist named David began working with me, pushing me through excruciating sessions that left me in tears but were necessary for my recovery. Walter, the night shift janitor, would stop by my room during his rounds and share stories from his 50 years of life experience, his gentle Jamaican accent becoming a comforting presence in the late hours when loneliness felt most acute. 2 weeks after the accident, Maya came into my room with an unusual expression, anger mixed with protectiveness. "Adriana, I was on Facebook last night and saw something I think you should know about," she said cautiously. "Your family, they're on vacation. In Cancun." She turned her phone screen toward me, showing me my mother's public post, a photo of my parents' sister and brother on a white sand beach, cocktails in hand, wide smiles on their tanned faces. The caption read, "Much needed family getaway, #blessed, #family time." The timestamp showed it was posted 3 days after my accident. While I lay in a hospital bed with tubes and wires keeping me alive, my family had boarded a plane to Mexico for a vacation they hadn't mentioned to me. A family vacation without the family member fighting to recover from life-threatening injuries. The revelation was like a physical blow. I stared at the image until Maya gently took the phone away. In that moment, something inside me broke, but something else, something stronger began to form in its place. "They're not coming, are they?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Maya shook her head sadly. "I don't think so, honey." That night alone in my hospital room, I allowed myself to truly feel the abandonment in its entirety. I sobbed until the nurses came running, concerned about my elevated heart rate on the monitors. When they asked what was wrong, if I was in pain, I could only manage to say between gasping breaths, "My family doesn't want me." Maya, who wasn't even scheduled to work that night, came in after being called by her colleague. She sat beside my bed and did something completely unprofessional, but entirely human. She climbed onto the narrow hospital bed beside me, careful of my tubes and wires, and held me while I cried until I had no tears left. "This isn't about you," she whispered. "This is about them and their inability to love properly. This says nothing about your worth." As I drifted into an exhausted sleep, I heard her add, "Sometimes the family we make is more real than the family we're born into." In that moment of complete despair, I had reached rock bottom. I had nothing left to lose, which meant I had everything to gain. As Maya had said, nowhere to go but up. Exactly 1 month after the accident, I woke up with a strange sense of clarity. The physical pain was still constant, but something had shifted inside me. For 27 years, I had organized my entire existence around gaining my family's approval and love. Every decision, every achievement, every aspect of my personality had been crafted to win the affection of people who were constitutionally incapable of giving it. As I lay in my hospital bed staring at the ceiling tiles I'd memorized over the past 4 weeks, I made a decision that would alter the course of my life. I was done seeking love from people who couldn't provide it. I was done making myself smaller to fit into my family's narrative. I was done apologizing for existing. That morning when David arrived for our physical therapy session, he immediately noticed the change in me. "Someone's got a different look today," he said as he helped me into the wheelchair to take me to the PT room. "What's going on in that head of yours?" "I'm going to walk out of this hospital on my own," I told him with quiet determination. "And I'm going to build a life that doesn't include people who don't want to be in it." David studied me for a moment, then nodded approvingly. "The first part is going to take a lot of work and pain. The second part, that's going to take even more courage." "I have both," I replied. From that day forward, my approach to recovery transformed. Where I had previously endured physical therapy, I now attacked it with fierce determination. When David instructed me to do 10 repetitions of an exercise, I pushed for 12. When pain threatened to overwhelm me, I channeled it into fuel for my resolve. The physical therapists began referring to me as their warrior princess, impressed by my sudden drive. During my downtime in the hospital room, I started documenting my journey in a journal Maya had brought me. I wrote about the accident, my family's abandonment, and the unexpected kindness of strangers who had become more like family than my blood relatives had ever been. Writing became both therapy and testimony, a way to process my pain and preserve the truth of my experience. After reading some of my journal entries, Maya made a suggestion that would change everything. "You should share this," she said, tapping the journal. "Your story could help other people who've been abandoned by family during crises. You write beautifully, and your experience is unfortunately not unique." Initially, I hesitated. Going public meant exposing my family's behavior, but it also meant exposing my own vulnerability and pain. "I don't know if I'm ready for that kind of scrutiny," I admitted. "Then start small," Maya suggested. "Maybe just an anonymous post on a support forum or a social media account that's not connected to your real name." That night, using my phone and lying in my hospital bed, I created a new Instagram account called Hospital Bed Confessions. I posted a simple photo of my hospital room view with a brief caption, Day 31 in hospital after nearly fatal car accident. No family has visited. Mother's exact words when called about my survival. Live or die, I don't care. We have dinner reservations. Finding strength in hospital staff who have become my surrogate family. Broken bones heal. Broken family ties might not. I expected perhaps a few sympathetic comments from random strangers. Instead, I woke up the next morning to find the post had gone viral overnight. Thousands of likes, hundreds of comments and messages flooding in from people sharing similar stories of family abandonment during health crises. One comment particularly stood out. Thank you for giving words to an experience I thought I was alone in. When I had cancer last year, my family couldn't handle it and disappeared. The nurses became my family too. Your courage in sharing this gives me courage to accept my situation. Over the following days, I continued posting updates about my recovery physical therapy triumphs and setbacks and reflections on finding worth outside of family validation. Each post resonated with an ever-growing audience of people who understood the unique pain of being abandoned by those who should have cared the most. My unexpected social media following caught the attention of a local news reporter who had been working on a series about patient experiences in the healthcare system. She reached out through my Instagram account asking if I would be willing to be interviewed about my experience. After careful consideration and consultation with Maya and David, I agreed. The interview took place in my hospital room with me still confined to a bed and wheelchair. I spoke candidly about both my physical recovery journey and the emotional abandonment I had experienced. I didn't embellish or dramatize. The plain truth was dramatic enough. The segment aired on the local evening news, and by the next morning it had been picked up by several national online news outlets. My story of resilience in the face of family abandonment struck a chord with viewers across the country. The hospital began receiving flowers cards and care packages addressed to me from strangers who had been moved by my story. 3 days after the news segment aired, my phone rang with a number I instantly recognized: my mother. After weeks of silence, the public exposure had finally prompted a response. I answered with a calm I didn't know I possessed. Adriana, my mother's voice was tight with controlled anger. What do you think you're doing? Recovering from near-fatal injuries, I replied simply. You know what I mean, she hissed. That ridiculous news story. Do you have any idea how this makes our family look? Your father's clients are asking questions. Jillian's law firm partners saw it. It's completely unacceptable. What's unacceptable, I countered, is abandoning your daughter in the hospital after a life-threatening accident to go on vacation in Cancun. We had planned that trip for months. We couldn't just cancel everything because you were careless enough to crash your car. Her words confirmed everything I had finally allowed myself to accept. There was no misunderstanding, no miscommunication. They had chosen a beach vacation over their critically injured daughter with full awareness and no remorse. I'm not taking down the interview if that's what you're calling about, I said. I didn't lie about anything. We'll sue you for defamation, she threatened. I've already spoken to a lawyer. Truth is an absolute defense to defamation. I responded, surprising myself with knowledge I must have absorbed from Jillian's law school conversations. Everything I said was factual. You did say, live or die, I don't care. You did go to Cancun while I was fighting for my life. No one in our family has visited me once in over a month of hospitalization. My father's voice suddenly came on the line. They must have been on speakerphone. Adriana, you're blowing this way out of proportion for attention, he said in his typical conflict-avoidant tone. Your mother was just upset about dinner when she got that call. We figured you had doctors and nurses taking care of you, and there wasn't much we could do. We're not medical professionals. You could have been parents, I replied, my voice finally breaking slightly. You could have just shown up. Next came Jillian's voice, sharp and lawyerly. You've potentially damaged our family's reputation permanently. Mom and Dad might lose business contacts. Did you even consider the consequences to everyone else before you decided to air our private family matters publicly? For a moment, I almost slipped back into my lifelong role as family peacemaker, the one who would apologize and smooth things over. But then I remembered the beach photos posted while I lay broken and alone, and my resolve hardened. "I'm simply telling the truth," I said quietly. "If the truth damages your reputation, perhaps you should examine your actions rather than silence the person who speaks about them." There was stunned silence on the other end of the line. Never in my life had I stood up to my family this way. "We're your family," my mother finally said, her voice cold. "You owe us loyalty." "Family is as family does," I answered before ending the call. That conversation was a watershed moment. For the first time in my life, I had set boundaries with my family and held firm. The sensation was terrifying but liberating, like stepping off a cliff and discovering I could fly. I had spent my whole life fearing their disapproval, only to discover that surviving it left me stronger than I had ever been. That night I slept peacefully for the first time since the accident. 6 weeks after the accident, Dr. Patel signed my discharge papers. My body was far from fully healed. I would need ongoing outpatient physical therapy for months, and my legs were still largely immobilized in braces. But I was medically stable enough to continue my recovery outside the hospital. This presented an immediate practical problem. My apartment in Chicago was a third-floor walk-up, completely inaccessible to someone who couldn't navigate stairs. My job had been understanding about my absence initially, but after 6 weeks they had made it clear that my position wouldn't be held indefinitely. And most importantly, I had no family to assist me during what would be a lengthy recovery period. As I contemplated these challenges, Maya appeared in my hospital room during her break, perched on the edge of my bed, and made an offer that brought me to tears. "I have a spare bedroom in my apartment," she said. "First floor wheelchair accessible bathroom. It's yours for as long as you need it." "Maya, I can't impose on you like that," I protested, even as relief flooded through me. "You've already done so much." "It's not an imposition," she insisted. "My sister lived there before she moved to Arizona last year. The room's just sitting empty. Besides, you need someone with medical training during your recovery, and I happen to be an excellent nurse." After much discussion and assurance that she was offering out of genuine care rather than obligation, I accepted Maya's generosity. The day I left the hospital, wheeled out by an orderly with Maya walking beside me carrying my few belongings, I was struck by the realization that I was leaving with more meaningful connections than I had arrived with, despite having no family present for either event. Adapting to life outside the hospital presented new challenges. Learning to navigate the world on crutches and in a wheelchair was humbling and frustrating. Simple tasks like showering or preparing food became complex operations requiring planning and assistance. Maya's apartment, while more accessible than my own, would have been still required adaptations for my limited mobility. Yet alongside these challenges came unexpected blessings. My online community organized a fundraiser that covered my remaining medical bills, not covered by insurance. Several followers who worked in marketing reached out with job leads for positions that could accommodate remote work during my continued recovery. After several virtual interviews conducted from Maya's living room, I accepted a position at a smaller but innovative social impact marketing firm that actually valued my personal story. They saw my experience not as a liability, but as an asset that gave me unique insight into human resilience and authenticity, qualities they wanted in their campaigns for nonprofit clients. Meanwhile, my relationships with the hospital staff who had supported me continued to flourish outside the clinical setting. Walter, the janitor who had shared his lunch during night shifts, became a regular visitor, often bringing his famous homemade Jamaican patties that he insisted would put meat back on those bones. David, my physical therapist, continued my outpatient treatment and became both friend and mentor, pushing me to exceed my recovery expectations while supporting me emotionally through the difficult process. We established a weekly dinner tradition, Maya, Walter, David, and me, gathering at Maya's apartment every Friday night to share meals and stories. They became the family I had chosen, bound by genuine care rather than obligatory blood ties. My social media presence continued to grow as I documented my ongoing recovery and reflections on family trauma. What had begun as an outlet for my pain evolved into a platform for advocacy. I received messages daily from people navigating their own family estrangements, seeking advice or simply connection with someone who understood. 3 months after my discharge, I received an unexpected email from a healthcare conference organizer who had seen my news interview. They invited me to speak at their annual event on the topic of patient support systems and the role of healthcare workers in situations of family abandonment. Though still using a wheelchair for longer distances, I had progressed to walking short stretches with a walker. The prospect of public speaking terrified me, but I recognized it as an opportunity to give voice to an experience shared by many but discussed by few. The day of the conference, Maya accompanied me for support. As I wheeled onto the stage and positioned myself behind the microphone, I was gripped by momentary panic. Then I spotted Maya in the front row giving me a thumbs up and found my courage. I spoke for 30 minutes about my experience, emphasizing not the abandonment itself, but the healing community that had formed in its wake. When I finished, the audience rose in a standing ovation that brought tears to my eyes. Medical professionals, many with tears streaming down their faces, lined up afterward to share stories of patients they had seen abandoned by family and to thank me for highlighting this often invisible trauma. Among those who approached me after my talk was a literary agent who believed my story could reach an even wider audience as a memoir. The idea both excited and terrified me, but after careful consideration, I signed with her. The advance from the subsequent book deal provided the financial security I needed to focus on both my physical recovery and the emotional work of crafting my narrative. As word of the book deal spread through my extended family network, my mother attempted a reconciliation of sorts. She called one evening, her voice unusually conciliatory. "Adriana, I think this situation has gotten out of hand," she began. "We're your family, and it's time to put this unpleasantness behind us." "What situation exactly?" I asked, genuinely curious about which aspect she considered problematic. "This public airing of private matters," she replied. "It's unnecessary and hurtful to the family." "I'm not interested in hurting anyone," I said truthfully. "I'm interested in telling my story." "Well, there are many sides to every story," she countered. "We could work this out privately as a family. Your father and I would be willing to have you come home for a weekend to discuss everything." For a moment, I felt the pull of my lifelong desire for their approval. Then I recognized the conditional nature of her offer. Reconciliation predicated on my silence. "I'm only interested in honest relationships at this point in my life," I told her. "That would require acknowledgement of what happened and why it was hurtful." "We were just giving you space to heal," my mother insisted, rewriting the narrative in real time. "We didn't want to interfere with your medical care." The gaslighting was so transparent it almost made me laugh. "Mom, you went to Cancun while I was in intensive care. That trip had been planned for months. We couldn't just cancel everything because of your accident. Life goes on, Adriana." Her words confirmed that nothing had changed. Any reconciliation would require me to accept their version of reality, a version that prioritized their convenience over my well-being. "I wish you well," I said finally, "but I can't have a relationship based on pretense." As the holiday season approached, I faced the prospect of my first Christmas without my biological family. Rather than dwelling on what I had lost, I focused on celebrating with the chosen family that had embraced me at my lowest point. Maya transformed her apartment with decorations. Walter brought traditional Jamaican Christmas cake, and David arrived with an armful of thoughtfully selected gifts. As we shared a meal around Maya's dining table, laughing and exchanging stories, I was struck by a profound realization. I was happier in this authentic gathering than I had ever been during the tense performance-based holiday celebrations of my childhood. For the first time, I could be fully myself without fear of criticism or rejection. That night, lying in bed in what had become my home, I reflected on how the worst experience of my life had somehow led to the most genuine connections I had ever known. The accident had not created my family's dysfunction. It had merely revealed what was already there, hidden beneath the veneer of normalcy I had spent my life maintaining. In losing what I thought I needed, I had found what I truly deserved. 1 year after the accident that nearly claimed my life and completely transformed it, My memoir, When Family Fails Finding Strength in Abandonment, was released to national attention. The book chronicled not just the accident and my family's response, but the larger journey of recognizing patterns of emotional neglect throughout my childhood and building a life based on authentic connections rather than obligatory ties. By this point, I was walking with minimal assistance, using only a cane for longer distances or on particularly challenging days. I had exceeded all medical expectations for my recovery, driven by a determination that surprised even David, who had supervised my physical therapy throughout the year. Most patients with injuries like yours would still be using a walker at minimum, he remarked during one of our now weekly lunch meetings. Your body has done what your heart did, healed beyond what seemed possible. The book's release brought a flurry of media attention. I appeared on morning talk shows, gave newspaper interviews, and participated in podcast discussions about family estrangement and the complex grief that accompanies it. Each appearance generated more messages from readers who saw their own experiences reflected in my story. One ordinary Tuesday afternoon, as I worked from my new ground-floor apartment, I had finally moved out of Maya's spare room. Though we remained close, my doorbell rang unexpectedly. When I opened the door, I found myself face to face with my younger brother Ethan, looking nervous and sober in a way I hadn't seen him in years. "Hey, Audrey," he said quietly. "Can we talk?" I hesitated only briefly before stepping aside to let him in. We settled in my small living room, an uncomfortable silence stretching between us until Ethan finally spoke. "I've been sober for 6 months," he began, twisting his hands in his lap. "Part of the process is making amends to people I've hurt, and I hurt you badly by not showing up when you needed me." "Yes, you did." I agreed, neither accusatory nor forgiving yet. "I've read your book," he continued. "Twice, actually. There's so much I didn't understand about our family until I read it through your eyes. And there's so much you don't know about what happened after your accident." Ethan proceeded to reveal family dynamics that had been hidden from me. After my accident, my mother had explicitly forbidden family members from visiting me, claiming it would only encourage my dramatics. She had controlled the family narrative, insisting that my injuries were being exaggerated and that hospital staff could provide all necessary support. "Dad actually sent money to the hospital for your care," Ethan revealed, shocking me. "Mom intercepted the funds somehow, and Jillian visited you twice while you were heavily sedated after surgeries. She left flowers, but the nurse probably assumed they were from the staff." "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, my emotions a confused jumble of anger, hurt, and a small, unwelcome flicker of hope. "Because I'm trying to get healthy, and that means being honest," he replied. "Our parents are still in denial about how they treated you, how they treated both of us, really. But your book woke something up in Jillian. She's been seeing a therapist, secretly trying to understand why she went along with everything." He hesitated before continuing. "They want to meet with you, Mom and Dad, at the house. Jillian will be there too." "Why?" I asked, immediately suspicious. "So they can pressure me to recant my story, write some family-approved version that makes them look better." "I honestly don't know," Ethan admitted. "Dad says he wants to explain his side. Mom is, well, still Mom. But I think you deserve to say your piece to their faces if you want to. And I'll be there with you this time. I promise." The prospect of returning to my childhood home to face the people who had abandoned me at my most vulnerable filled me with dread. Yet some part of me recognized that true closure might require one final confrontation, not to seek their approval or even their understanding, but to fully claim my narrative on my terms. After several days of deliberation and conversations with Maya and my therapist, I agreed to the meeting. Maya helped me prepare emotionally role-playing potential scenarios, and reminding me that whatever happened, I now had a solid foundation of self-worth that couldn't be shaken by my family's response. The drive back to Michigan was heavy with memories. As I approached the same stretch of highway where I had crashed, I noticed a small memorial garden had been established at the site. Not for me, but for another accident victim who hadn't been as fortunate. The site was a stark reminder of how close I had come to death and how precious my reclaimed life had become. Pulling into the driveway of my childhood home, I took a deep breath and reminded myself that I was no longer the desperate-to-please daughter who had left this house a year ago. I was returning as a woman who had rebuilt herself from the fragments of a shattered life. Ethan met me at the car, offering both emotional and physical support as I made my way up the front steps with my cane. Inside the house looked exactly as it always had, pristine, impersonal, and cold despite its perfect decor. My parents and sister waited in the living room, an awkward tableau of familial discomfort. My mother spoke first, her voice carrying its usual undercurrent of judgment. "You're walking better than I expected." "No thanks to you," I replied, calmly settling myself on the sofa. My father cleared his throat. "Adriana, we asked you here because we think there have been misunderstandings on both sides. Your book has painted us in a very unflattering light, and we wanted to explain our perspective." "I'm listening," I said, though I doubted anything they could say would justify their actions. What followed was a painful hour of attempted justifications. My mother insisted that she had been in shock when she made her cruel comment to the nurse that the Cancun trip couldn't be rescheduled, that she had assumed the hospital would contact them if there were real problems. My father claimed he had been caught in the middle, trying to support both his wife and his daughter without making things worse. As they spoke, I watched my sister Jillian. Unlike our parents, she sat silent, her expression troubled and her eyes frequently downcast. When my father finally ran out of excuses, an uncomfortable silence fell over the room. "Is that all?" I asked quietly. "What do you want from us, Adriana?" my mother demanded, frustration breaking through her controlled facade. "A public apology. Money. What will it take for you to stop this crusade against your own family?" "I don't want anything from you," I answered truthfully. "I came here today to say what I needed to say directly to your faces rather than just in my book." I turned to face them fully, my hands steady in my lap. "When I was fighting for my life, you chose a beach vacation over sitting by my hospital bed. When I needed family most, you decided I wasn't worth the inconvenience. That choice revealed everything about our relationship that I had spent my whole life trying not to see." I continued, my voice growing stronger. "The truth is, you abandoned me long before the accident. The only difference is that this time other people saw it too. I spent 27 years trying to earn love that should have been freely given. I won't spend one more day doing that." My mother's face hardened with anger. "After everything we gave you, a good home education opportunities, this is how you repay us, with public humiliation." "I told the truth," I stated simply. "If the truth humiliates you, that's not my responsibility to fix." To everyone's surprise, Jillian suddenly spoke up, her voice shaking. "She's right, Mom." All heads turned to my sister, who had always been my mother's perfect reflection. "What did you say?" my mother asked dangerously. "Adriana is right," Jillian repeated louder this time. "What we did was wrong. What we've been doing to her for years was wrong. I visited her in the hospital twice, and I lied to you about where I was going because I was too cowardly to stand up to you. I saw how badly she was hurt, and I still got on that plane to Cancun because I was afraid of disappointing you." Tears streamed down my sister's face, the first genuine emotion I had seen from her in years. "I've spent my whole life trying to be perfect so you wouldn't treat me the way you treated Adriana and Ethan, and in doing that, I became complicit in their pain." My mother rose from her seat, towering over us in her fury. "That is enough. I will not sit here and be attacked in my own home by my own children." "They're not attacking you, Catherine," my father interjected, surprising everyone. "They're telling you how they feel. Maybe it's time we listened." My mother stared at him in shock. In all my life, I had never seen my father contradict her so directly. Emboldened by this unexpected support, I delivered the boundary I had come to establish. "I'm willing to have individual relationships with any family members who can acknowledge the truth and treat me with genuine respect, but I will never again compromise my well-being or silence my voice to maintain a false image of family harmony." I stood carefully, using my cane for support. "The choice is yours. You can have an honest relationship with the real me, or you can have no relationship at all." Those are the only options now. Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked toward the door, my head held high, despite the slight limp that remained from my injuries. Ethan immediately moved to follow me, and after a moment's hesitation, so did Jillian. In the driveway, Jillian embraced me awkwardly, our first genuine hug in years. "I'm so sorry, Audrey. For everything." "I know." I said, not quite ready to offer forgiveness, but willing to leave the door open to possibility. This is just the beginning of a very long conversation. As I drove away from my childhood home, I felt lighter than I had in years. Whether my parents chose to be part of my future remained to be seen. For the first time, their choice didn't define my worth. I had spoken my truth, set my boundaries, and walked away on my own terms, literally and figuratively. I had entered that house on a cane, still bearing the physical marks of trauma. But I had walked out with a strength no accident could take away. 2 years after the accident that nearly claimed my life, I stood without assistance at the podium of a Grand Hotel ballroom addressing the inaugural gala for the Foundation for Patient Support, the nonprofit organization I had founded with the proceeds from my memoir and speaking engagements. When I lay in that hospital bed, abandoned by those who should have been by my side, I couldn't have imagined standing here tonight. I began surveying the room filled with healthcare professionals, former patients and advocates. But as Maya, my nurse and now dear friend, told me during my darkest moment, sometimes the family we make is more real than the family we're born into. My physical recovery had exceeded all medical expectations. Though I would always carry scars and occasional pain from my injuries, I had regained full mobility. David joked that I was his miracle patient, though we both knew my recovery had been the result of determination and hard work, rather than divine intervention. The foundation had been established with a clear mission to provide emotional and practical support to hospital patients without family presence. We funded programs that trained hospital volunteers, created support groups for those estranged from family, and advocated for healthcare policies that recognized the needs of patients without traditional support systems. My memoir had become a bestseller, opening a national conversation about family estrangement and challenging the notion that blood ties automatically constituted meaningful relationships. I had received thousands of letters from readers who found validation in my story, people who had experienced similar abandonment and had struggled with the shame and isolation that often accompanied it. That night at the gala, we honored 3 individuals who had transformed my personal tragedy into the beginning of a movement. Maya, who had opened her home and heart to me. Walter, whose wisdom and compassion had provided stability during my darkest hours. And David, whose belief in my physical recovery had made it possible. As they joined me on stage to receive their recognition, I felt a fullness in my heart that transcended the pain of my past. These people had taught me what true family meant, not obligation based on shared genetics, but choice based on genuine care. My relationship with my biological family had evolved in complex ways over the 2 years since our confrontation. My brother Ethan had maintained his sobriety and become a steady presence in my life. We spoke weekly and were slowly rebuilding trust that had been damaged by years of family dysfunction. My sister Jillian and I had developed a cautious but increasingly honest relationship. Her journey toward recognizing and addressing our parents' emotional neglect had been difficult but genuine. We weren't close friends, but we were perhaps becoming the sisters we might have been in a healthier family environment. My parents remained the most complicated aspect of my story. Following our confrontation, they had initially refused contact, angry at what they perceived as a betrayal. 6 months later, my father had reached out independently, asking to meet for lunch during a business trip to Chicago. Our conversation had been awkward, but represented his first acknowledgement, however limited, that their response to my accident had been wrong. My mother maintained more distance, though she had stopped threatening legal action and occasionally sent stiffly formal birthday and holiday cards. She remained unable or unwilling to truly acknowledge her role in the family dynamics I had exposed, but she at least respected the boundaries I had established. I had come to understand that forgiveness didn't require reconciliation. I could release the anger that had once consumed me without inviting further harm into my life. Some relationships could not be fixed, and that was a reality to be accepted rather than a failure to be blamed for. My personal life had flourished in unexpected ways as well. Through a support group for family estrangement that I had attended during my recovery, I met Jordan, a kind and perceptive therapist, who had navigated his own complicated family history. Our connection had deepened over shared understanding and mutual respect, culminating in our marriage 6 months before the gala. As I concluded my speech that night, I shared the wisdom that had emerged from my journey. The accident that shattered my bones revealed what was already broken in my family. But in that breaking, I found a truth that has set me free. We are not defined by who didn't love us, but by how we choose to love others. True family isn't determined by blood, but by who shows up, not just in crisis, but in the ordinary moments that make up a life together. The greatest gift I received from my family's abandonment was the freedom to create a life based on authenticity rather than obligation, a life surrounded by people who choose me every day as I choose them. After the gala, I returned to the small memorial garden that had been established at the site of my accident. Jordan stood a respectful distance away, giving me a moment alone with the place where my old life had ended and my new one had begun. I placed a small stone on the garden wall, a tradition I had started on the 1-year anniversary of the accident. The stone bore a simple inscription, gratitude, not for the accident itself or the pain it had caused, but for the journey of discovery it had initiated. As I stood there reflecting on the distance I had traveled both physically and emotionally from that rainstorm-slick highway, I felt a profound sense of peace. The family that had abandoned me had unwittingly given me the greatest gift, the freedom to become who I was meant to be, surrounded by people who loved me not out of obligation but choice. Sometimes our deepest wounds become our greatest teachers. Sometimes the worst moments of our lives become the catalyst for our most authentic selves to emerge. And sometimes, when everything falls apart, we discover we are far stronger than we ever imagined possible. Have you ever experienced a moment that initially seemed like the worst thing that could happen, but ultimately led to unexpected growth or transformation? I'd love to hear your stories of resilience in the comments below. If this journey resonated with you, please consider subscribing and sharing with someone who might need to hear that family is about love, not just blood. Thank you for bearing witness to my story, and remember, sometimes our breaking points become our breakthrough moments. Like, subscribe, and join me next week for another chapter in this journey we call life.